But in the end, our goal should be to make sure you don't have to go through this again. And now, how many days away are we? Are we 15 days away today? 15 days away. And the irony is, I can't argue with those who raised your hand that we haven't seen enough progress to make you feel any better about not being put in that exact same situation again. That's disheartening to see that we have such pessimism, but I can understand it too after many of you went through a 35-day furlough. So we know what was impacted, but I really want to hear from you. What was impacted the most? What was your biggest impact in your families? And then also, if somebody could also give me an idea of, what do you see the long-term impacts are for this fiscal year at the Lincoln Home Historic Site with this 35-day shutdown? What are you missing out on? What are you missing out on as an agency? But also, tell me what you missed out on personally too, because I'm really here to listen to you, because I want to take your stories back and tell people to sit down and come up with a solution. So, who wants to start? Yes, sir.
My name is Jared Kaler, and I am a paid intern to the Conservation Legacy. I barely made it through the 35-day shutdown. If the government does shut down again, I don't know how I'm going to pay rent, my car payment, my Discover Card bills, any medical bills that I might have. It was tough. I will not get back pay since I'm not an employee or an intern. So just please, let's get something together in 15 days that we have.
See, that's one that folks in Washington, I bet, don't realize. You got a lot of people that are looking to get into working for federal agencies like the Department of Interior and be, willing to go anywhere in the nation, just like my new friend came to Springfield from Los Angeles and didn't regret it the last 2 days, I'm sure. But you're willing, you want to get into the federal workforce, right? Do you have another job? Are you in school right now?
I just graduated UIS.
What's your degree? History?
Yep.
Perfect for the Lincoln Historic Site. So paid interns do not get back pay. I did not know that. Thank you for letting me know, and we'll take that information back to Washington too. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
On the professional end, our seasonal hiring got pushed back. We lost about a month and a half of hiring.
And what do those seasonal hires do here at the Lincoln site?
So the summer's starting from about mid-February to October is our busiest season. Buses coming, whether it's schools, visitors from other places coming, and really just our busiest time, giving tours every 10 minutes at times. And so those seasonals help us with that. And so that's going to be our greatest impact, is that pushback of seasonal hiring. We've lost about a month and a half. It takes 6 weeks for a background check to go through. And so, once we make those hires, it's not going to be until the end of March, beginning of April that they come. And that's really part of our busy season. So we're scrambling to figure out how do we make this happen? How do we continue to support our visitors and ensure that they have a great experience.
How many visitors a year do you guys average?
250,000.
250,000. And this is your low point, obviously the weather, but not being prepared moving into the spring, which is your busy season for field trips and what have you.
A lot of school kids coming down from Chicago, especially.
They even come up from Taylorville.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They're favorites.
Thank you.
But
Obviously, you didn't have my kids' class.
thousands of students coming, and that's educated. Scramble. Try to be ready.
Scramble to try to be ready with the threat of another shutdown in 15 days. So how can you get these seasonals hired in 21 days, which was the continuing resolution, right?
So our human resources is working on it. We have interviews scheduled. I have interviews all afternoon to hire students, which we call pathways. And then next week we'll be working on our seasonal
Okay. Who else? Anybody?
Congressman, I'd also like to point out.
And Mr. Good, thank you for allowing us to come in and talk to the folks here.
For coming out and visiting the staff. I also want to thank the press for showing up here. I believe you're a valuable part of the democracy and covering events like this is to your credit. I want to highlight 4 exceptional employees. Jason, raise your hand. And also Rodney and Gabe, law enforcement. They were required to come to work. They were considered accepted employees, but they were not paid during that time. And because they were required to come to work, they did not receive referral numbers. So they could not apply for unemployment insurance. And obviously, having to work for the 40 hours, that limited their ability to take outside work as well, which put a financial strain on all of them. My thanks to them for continuing to come in to protect the Lincoln Home site. But I think that's another factor that's often lost in the shutdown, the restrictions it places on those employees that are required to come in.
You know, that is part of a discussion that we've had in Washington, because it's true. How many of you that were furloughed applied and got unemployment benefits? You did? Okay. Those who are forced to come to work, I believe every federal employee is essential. So I don't like to use the term essential and non-essential, but everyone who was forced to come to work during this shutdown, you're not eligible to apply for unemployment. And frankly, I don't know if anybody who gets unemployment, if they got back pay, are having to pay it back. Is that? They do have to pay it back. All right, there's a misconception in Washington that you don't have to pay it back if you apply for unemployment. So that's good to know too. But the bottom line is, we're here to make sure that we hear from each and every one of you, what message can I take back? And I'm getting a few, and I'm learning from you, which is again why I'm here, is I want to understand what kind of impact this has on the areas and the employees that I serve, but also as we move into the future. Now, Mr. Good, as we look ahead, what's your biggest fear over the next year if we go into another shutdown in 15 days?
Mr. Good, would you mind, we can't hear you.
Sure.
Here, come on up. You guys can throw things at him and then act like it's at me. It's okay.
Well, I want to follow up on Vanessa's. Sure. I want to follow up on Vanessa's point, which I think she made very well. January is a key planning month for the National Park Service throughout the country, not just here at Lincoln Home. And our seasonal workforce is a pivotal part of our way to accomplish our goals throughout the year. This affects locally here at Lincoln Home our maintenance staff that Jason leads and the interp staff that Vanessa leads. And so we lost that time. And so right now we're trying to hire that staff as fast as possible. But our ability to serve the American public, like Tim said, 250,000 visitors, I can't guarantee what we're going to be able to accomplish if we're not able to get that seasonal workforce in place in time. And Lincoln Home's not unique this way. This impacts national parks throughout the country.
It really does. Now, you guys in the media keep yelling at him. He's not going to say you defend democracy anymore. All right? Hey, no, hey, thank you for coming up. Hey, look, anybody else? Questions, comments? I mean, open forum. What do you guys want to talk about? Yes, sir.
Kind of back on our individuals that did work. One thing that's kind of striking to me is that when we get paid back, after the shutdown has ended, and we get the back pay, our individuals who are required to work during the furlough receive back pay as well, which is great. But it seems to me that it's a little unfair, though. I mean, it seems to me like they should maybe get time and a half for their time that they work, because they get the exact same pay that the rest of the employees who actually sat at home waiting for the government to open back up. So our folks who are forced to work receive nothing extra for that dedication and all of that.
It's a very good point. What's your name again?
Joe Sorter.
Joe Sorter? Right. Joe's name down, because I want to be able to go back and talk about Joe Sorter from the Lincoln Home Historic Site. Actually is talking about exactly what I talked to our leadership team about. How do we make sure those folks who have had to go to work for 35 days? Now, granted, those who didn't, it's not your fault. You should not be out any back pay. But frankly, we ought to be able to make sure the folks who were here who I know some that were here during that time still haven't gotten their back pay yet, right? And others have. That's another issue I want to talk to the Department of Interior about. If you're on the same payroll, why in the world can't everybody get paid with their back pay at once? That's a good question we'll have. Sorry about that, Greg. I had the same conversation, the type of bonus, type of back pay, type of, let's make sure those who were deemed having to come to work, and these are very important jobs too. Look, every TSA agent I walked by in the airport, number one, knew exactly who I was, and number two, talked to me about how they weren't getting paid during that shutdown. And I agree, it's terrible, absolutely terrible, and I blame both sides for it. I really do. Blame both sides for every shutdown. And then we've got our border protection agents that are working every single day. Air traffic controllers that are having to come in, they're deemed having to be at work every single day. I think government ought to come together and pass our spending bills so that everybody who's a federal employee can come to work every day and not have to worry about who does and who doesn't. So that's my goal too as we leave here. Anybody got anything else? Yes, sir.
My concern is not so much internally with the National Park Service, but actually externally. What we don't think about within our society is how this shutdown affects our businesses around us. A lot of visitors come here to this park specifically to see Lincoln's Home and other parks around the nation, and those businesses that are around it are greatly impacted. And I don't know how much Congress really takes into influence in that regards as to how they're greatly impacted and the income that they lose, and they'll never recover.
Right.
If you look around Lincoln Home here, you can see many businesses right along 7th Street here that are just neglected because of what their loss is.
No, I can tell you there are people in Congress that do take that into consideration, and I feel like I'm one of them. Look, as somebody who represents the state capitol, I mean, it's part of Lincoln's old congressional district. I know better than most in Washington how important history is to communities like Springfield and how important it is to share history and make sure that we have sites like this Lincoln Home Historic Site open for business so that we can get, so that the next generation can understand how important that individual was, not just to our community, not just to this district, even during his one term in the House of Representatives, but what history and Lincoln's decisions mean to our country and who we are today. That's why it's estimated the Congressional Budget Office said $3 billion was lost in our overall economy because of the 35-day partial government shutdown. Remember, this also was the first partial shutdown I've been a part of. And what really frustrates me, and I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, we had bipartisan agreement on 75% of the rest of government spending. What was included in that? Things I supported. Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services. We don't want to stop cancer research, ALS research, other medical research, education. We want to make sure our education dollars are getting to our schools. Department of Labor. We also funded legislative branch. Who's that? That's us. I will tell you as somebody who's in the legislative branch, this shutdown is different from all others because there's absolutely zero pressure on the legislative branch during this shutdown. And I think that leads to more politics being played. And that's something that we as Republicans and Democrats ought to agree on. If you're going to go into a shutdown, all agencies ought to feel the pain. And Congress isn't feeling it right now. The pain we feel is the frustration that you relay to us and that our constituents relay to us. But we don't have to, like in previous shutdowns, determine who's essential and who's not essential. And I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think that's played a role in all sides digging in. Now, how do we fix this? I will tell you, as somebody who represents this area, who's a federal employee, longtime federal employee myself, and a current federal employee now, I want to do what we can to make sure we put the people in place to negotiate a deal before the 15 days is up. I don't want to see you have to go through the same decisions that you went through. I was at the White House during this last shutdown, invited as a small group, as what was supposed to be a bipartisan group, to go to lunch with the president and the vice president and members of the president's team. I got to the White House, and it was just me and my Republican colleagues. That was very disappointing. So we went out to the media and said, if both sides can't come together, how are we ever going to stop this? Coincidentally, the next day, another bipartisan group was invited, and both sides showed up. That's a great first step. Now, there's going to be a lot of partisan blame that goes around. And I came in here, and the first comment I made, I said, this is both sides that lead to these things. I get it. But government funding shouldn't be partisan. It should be what's best for our communities, what's best for our districts, and what's best for our economy. Now, the president's been very clear. He wants investment in more border security. The border security is not just about the immigration debate. We have areas along our southern border that have a border structure. You can call it whatever you want, a wall, a fence, slatted steel, I don't care. It's there. And as a matter of fact, we as Republicans and Democrats have voted together to replace the existing structure that's all rusted out steel along the San Diego sector that I visited last September. And they're replacing it with new fencing right now that everybody voted for in past appropriations bills. And it's a fact that when border structures are implemented, you reduce illegal immigration into those sectors by a minimum of 90%. 90%. But it's not just about the immigration issue. Because I think we ought to have a fix for our DACA kids and our dreamers. And why not come up with a bipartisan solution to make that happen? Matter of fact, I voted for a bill in July that would have provided $25 billion for a complete border structure along the southern border. All the areas that the professionals in the Department of Homeland Security, just like your professionals in the Department of Interior, all the areas they say they need, we're listening to them. And it's not just this administration's border officials that we're listening to, it's previous administrations. It's a bipartisan group. So we're listening to them. I voted for $25 billion. You know what else it had? It had fixes to our current immigration system. Anybody here a naturalized citizen? Anybody here have relatives or know who is?
My husband is
Was a DACA recipient? Is he naturalized now?
He just removed the condition, and that was a extremely long process.
And that's why we need a fix. And the current immigration system, I can tell you, as somebody who helped immigrants navigate that naturalization process, it's too costly, it's too burdensome, and way too bureaucratic. But I'd urge anybody, if you want to see the most patriotic events that I've ever experienced, go to a naturalization ceremony. That is Americans, newly minted Americans, raising their right hands to become citizens of our country. That process needed to be fixed. That bill did that. We also had a permanent fix for our DACA population and our dreamers. And remember all the political wrangling about families being separated at the border? We codified into law that no families could be separated at the border unless, of course, suspected of human trafficking, carrying drugs, etc. You got to do that. So those things would have been implemented. And there was a group of us, over 100, and I believe almost 200 of us, that voted for that bill. But we got zero Democratic support and not enough Republican support. And I said to the president's team, you didn't do enough to help us pass that bill. We could have avoided all of this. We wouldn't have a debate over border security. Now, at that lunch with the president and his team, the president asked for $5.7 billion to begin the process of expanding the border structures along the southern border. But what's not publicized is another $6.1 billion that he asked for in his initial offer that went to humanitarian efforts. It went to hiring more agents along the southern border, more judges to get the backlog of immigration cases that are already growing in our country, and other non-border structure immigration-related issues and border security-related issues that many Democrats and Republicans have said they're for. So it's 5.7 for a structure, 6.1 for the others. And at the time I went over to the White House, it had been almost 15 days since the new Speaker of the House and the leader of the Senate went to the White House to even put an offer on the table. A few days later, the president said, let's put a temporary fix in for DACA. It was met with crickets from the other side. All we heard was open government first, and we'll negotiate. The president, surprising to me even, did that. 21 days. He said, okay, you want us to open government for 21 days, and you'll come negotiate? Awesome. Guess how many times the Speaker and leader have been to the White House since then? 0. These shutdowns are going to be solved by leadership of both parties sitting down and coming up with a solution. And I have a lot of faith in the conference committee. Senator Durbin's on the conference committee. I would hope that he's going to bargain in good faith, but I know my House colleagues who are part of this conference committee on border security. Kay Granger, our ranking member on appropriations. Chuck Fleshman, who is the ranking Republican on the Homeland Security Appropriations Committee. My good friend Tom Graves. I mean, these are folks that I know want to sit down and come up with a deal. The Democrats in the House appointed folks that I believe will come up with a long-term solution too. Pete Aguilar out of California, a friend of mine. Henry Cuellar out of Texas, another friend of mine. These folks want solutions. The key is leadership of both sides going to allow those solutions to take place. I'm going to continue to be a voice to make sure leadership understands the impact of any shutdown, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you coming out here today. Does anybody have some closing questions? Because I don't want to keep you from your workplace. Yes, sir.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, but one of the things that comes up during these shutdowns and whatnot is the sheer number of American household families that are one paycheck away from disaster. I certainly hope that gets a little more discussion within Congress. Not that there's anything that can be done about it, but it certainly seems there's something wrong there. And as we look at the potential of another government shutdown, I hope that's taken into consideration. I also want to say that it was very heartwarming to see nationally, but more importantly locally, the outpouring of support for federal employees during this time. And I would thank the local community for stepping up, with the offer of assistance. And that is the nature of community. It was very, very nice to see it. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I would echo those comments. But let's get to a point where they can be generous to federal employees every other day, rather than having to be a financial institution to say, hey, you don't have to make your credit card payment. We shouldn't get to that point. And that's going to take Republicans and Democrats to come together. But again, I don't think it's a coincidence that there's zero pressure on the legislative branch, and you see partisan politics, in my opinion, leading the way in this issue. And it's frustrating to me. But I'm going to take your stories back. Some of the ideas we've talked about, now you give me more evidence to go back and say these are good ideas, these are good solutions. But I'm sorry you're part of the 25% of government that didn't get bipartisan consensus last year. And yes, people will say, but Republicans had control of all three branches. The way the Senate works, you need 60 votes. So you have to have bipartisanship. Still, we have to have bipartisanship. Now, government is split. It's up to both sides to come together and govern. One side can't just sit there and blame the other side anymore. So I hope everybody takes that into consideration, and I want to continue this dialogue. If you need me, please reach out. I have an office here in town, one in Taylorville, one in Decatur. We're very, very close. So call and let us know what your concerns are. I want to be able to relay what your concerns are and what your needs are. And again, thanks for being here. I really, truly appreciate it. It's an honor to represent you. Thanks.
Congressman, you taking questions?
Yeah, I'll take questions.
Off topic. We'll let these park people leave it.
Clearly step forward and put offers on the table. I mean, the sheer fact that the president offered $5.7 billion for a border structure, $6.1 billion for humanitarian aid and other Homeland Security funding priorities that Democrats had said they wanted, it was met with crickets from Speaker Pelosi, who now runs the House. It was met with crickets from Leader Schumer. So he offered then, how about a temporary fix for our DACA population, which I'm in favor of. I'm in favor of a permanent fix. And you know what? That was met with crickets, except for they said open government first. And the last bill that they asked us to vote for a temporary opening of government before the final solution was put forth, was for 21 days. So the president moved 3 times to say, okay, now we'll negotiate. And the Democrats still, Speaker Pelosi still will not go meet with the White House. And that's what is frustrating. Speaker Pelosi was given the chance to run the House of Representatives. She bears responsibility for governing now. And I believe, from my experience with other previous shutdowns, that the only way this gets solved is to have leadership of both parties sitting at the table with the White House. Now, I was part of what was supposed to be a bipartisan luncheon, and I was very disappointed no Democrats showed up to that luncheon that I was a part of a few weeks ago. I can tell you in the 2013 shutdown, as a new freshman, if I would have been invited by the Obama White House to come and talk about solutions, I would have been there. I didn't get the invite, but I would have been there. And I think it's pretty telling there are a lot of freshman Democrats right now that are asking and signing letters to Speaker Pelosi saying compromise, compromise, compromise. But I think she's too scared of the very hyper-partisan left wing of her party to give President Trump any type of victory, or what could be perceived as a victory. And that's a very challenging place for a Speaker of the House to be.
Congressman, is it immoral to build a wall, as the Speaker has said and some of her Democrat caucus has reiterated?
If it's immoral to build a border structure, a fence, that is all the president is asking for. The president, and I confirmed this with his Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, at that lunch. All you're asking for is the same type of slatted steel fence that you're installing right now along the San Diego border to go into other areas that border security has identified as problem areas. And she said, absolutely, that's all we're asking for. So if Democrats think it's immoral, then why in the world aren't they introducing bills to take down the border fences that already exist?
Is it a problem that the president keeps changing what he says about what a wall is? Today, the tweets change every day since that meeting you had with Nielsen. A wall is a wall, or it's just a fence, or call it what you want. And he also had agreed to keep the government open before, and then after Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh complained, said, we need a wall or we're going to shut it down, and we'll be proud to do it. So why should Democrats trust the president as a partner in this negotiation when what he says keeps changing?
Well, because the president's the only one that moved during that shutdown. The president's the only one who made serious offers and put them on the table. Not just a border structure, but billions, even billions more, for priorities that many Democrats had put forth for their homeland security provisions. The president also said, let's come up with a solution for our DACA population. The president then took it a step further when asked by Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer to open up government first so that they'll negotiate with him. He did it. So I think the president has moved. The onus is on Speaker Pelosi right now to lead. And she hasn't shown me any instance where I believe that that's going to happen. And that's unfortunate, because the people that we met here today are going to be impacted by her lack of concern and lack of effort to go work with this White House. And I believe only because of a partisan nature, Bernie.
What's the most, I guess, salient thing that you took away from hearing from the federal employees here today?
That there are some long-term effects to the Lincoln Historic Site. They're not going to be ready for their busy season because the steps that they take every year are not able to be taken because of the 35-day shutdown. And I also heard from many of the employees that this isn't about who's furloughed and who's not. There are people that are here every single day working without getting paid. That's wrong. We as Republicans and Democrats in Washington ought to pass my bill that would end government shutdowns as we know it by funding any unfunded agencies at previous years, at levels of previous years' funding, because then we start debating and governing like every other level of government. Your local city council doesn't get to shut down when they don't have a spending agreement. You know what they do? They come together and they work out their differences. That's the key. And that's what we are, that's the biggest takeaway I've taken from the folks that are here at the site and are very hardworking employees of the Department of Interior.
Congressman, Rodney, what if we had a variation of your bill and say the only people that then don't get paid in the government shutdown are members of Congress and congressional staff? So there's still some pressure, but it doesn't impact the entire nation. We don't shut down parks.
Well, Congress doesn't do it on its own, Terry. So I believe the sheer fact that there was bipartisan agreement to fund the legislative branch has taken pressure off the legislative branch. So what we need to do is instead of fighting to deny pay to hardworking federal employees, no matter what branch they work in, because not everybody in the legislative branch works for an elected member of office. There are a lot of people in the legislative branch, like our Capitol policeman, who saved my life and many others. They're not working for individual members of Congress. They're working for the legislative branch. They deserve to be paid just like our law enforcement here at the historic site. So instead of worrying about who's not going to get paid, how about we worry about getting government funded together? That's why my bill's so important. It would put government funding on somewhat of an autopilot. And that autopilot would be able to continue to pay our employees who are essential to our nation's economy, no matter what branch they worked in. And then maybe at that point in time, Republicans and Democrats who are on our Appropriations Committee and our leaders of both parties can come up with solutions like they should every year.
So
You said you said earlier that you blamed both sides for the shutdown, and you said a lot about what you thought the Democrats did wrong in this process. What did the Republicans do wrong?
What's your name again?
Cole,
Cole, who are you with?
WCI.
Thank you, Cole. Well, Cole, I think the president was wrong to say that he'll own this shutdown. And I think the president boxed himself into a corner to where many in the American public believe that it was a shutdown that was caused by the Trump administration and Trump administration only. But that doesn't take away the fact that Nancy Pelosi, who now runs the House of Representatives, and Leader Schumer did not come to the table to even negotiate. And I believe the president realized his mistake by moving many different offers forward on the table. He asked for border funding, but billions more for non-border Homeland Security funding that Democrats had supported in the past and as recently as this year. He then put a fix for DACA recipients on the table. And he was told by Democrats, well, just open government first. And surprising to even me, he opened government for 3 weeks, and still not a single visit from Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer to the White House to even put an offer on the table. That's what's frustrating. Yes, it's bipartisan in nature, and it's going to take bipartisanship to solve it too.
And are you saying that?
Two quick questions. Number one, you have the Taylorville Fire Chief coming to the State of the Union. Why'd you select him?
You know, Mike's been a friend of mine. We went to school together from junior high through high school, and I've known him practically my whole life. The decisions that Mike Cruz made on December 1st of this year potentially saved hundreds of lives in my hometown of Taylorville. We had our large Christmas parade scheduled for that night. And remember, that day was one of the most beautiful December days we've experienced in our lifetime. Who would think about shutting a parade down with weather like that? But Mike made the decision that day to cancel that parade. And if you know my hometown, you know well that many people who would have been lined up for that parade would have been right in the midst of that tornado and the path that that tornado took. So Mike making that decision potentially saved hundreds of lives, and it's decisions like that that are made at our local levels that, let's say that tornado didn't come, I bet you him canceling the parade probably would have been on the city council agenda for the next 4 meetings, because how dare you do that? But it takes courage, and it's courage that people like Mike Cruz and our city officials in Taylorville exhibited that allowed many people to still be here today.
One other question. China yesterday agreed to buy U.S. soybeans. Can you talk about that just very briefly and how that'll impact the farm economy here in Central?
You know, this is a recent story I read this morning that China agreed to purchase, I believe, 5 million metric tons of soybeans. They're going to be able to increase their supply, and that's something that our farmers have been clamoring for. Look, we want countries to trade fair. We all know China doesn't trade fair. And to see China come to the table with an offer like this has got to make our farmers more comfortable going into next year's planting season.